that we've now been teaching it, well, since 2002, that's 12 years.
What if you could time travel with them? Visit mythical places or angelic realms, other worlds, other galaxies. Help others to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT, and now you can learn her method by going directly to dolorescannon.com. And don't forget to mention the discount code MORETALKS. Have you ever wondered, can you communicate directly with spirit guides, teachers, or non-physical consciousness, or even our higher selves? What would they tell us? My name is Kevin Moore, and since 2015, I started to practice a form of communication which is termed channeling. I have been interviewing experts on my talk show to find out, does life continue after we die? And can we communicate with those that have crossed over? With each expert I spoke to, they all had different ideas. Is there knowledge from the past which could be shared with the present moment? So I thought, why not just speak to the non-physical world directly through channelers around the world? And that's what I set out to do. They Call Us Channelers will take the viewers on a journey into the phenomena known as channeling. And my main goal with this docuseries is to bring a new understanding and awareness to channeling by looking within ourselves and asking, is it truly possible that we can all use this innate ability?
I grew up in various university campuses. My dad was a university lecturer, kind of a head of department at one point before he retired. So we lived from one campus to the other. And my mum was a librarian. In terms of spirituality, if you want to go there, we used to attend a church that, in a way, looking back, it feels like a mix between like a Baptist church and a Seventh-day Adventist church. So we used to go to church on Saturdays, but then we had observed all the Jewish traditions and all the Jewish, Sabbath and festivals throughout the year. And for me, I've always been about being able to look at your own relationship with, I guess, your creator, your higher self, the aspects of us that we don't always see. And that was the most important thing. And as I grew up, I was more and more into personal development and creating things and circumstances for myself as well. I think I didn't know at that time, but now looking back, if I was always attracted to people who were quite older than me, I think, in terms of having friends. And I think it was because they used to say something and I'll say something, like if they have a problem, they will say it and I'll say something back. And somehow they used to think it was the right answer. And so now these days, when people ask me whether I feel that I had some of these channeling abilities, I say, well, I don't know. But one thing that I know throughout my career, throughout my life, is that the element of advice has always been very strong with me, is the aspect of me that I don't really have to think before I do. And so when I discovered that you can actually give advice and get paid for it, it was a no-brainer for me, which is why everything I have done has an element of advice. Even when I was in sales or leading sales teams, I think the way I approached it was more from the perspective of going deeper, knowing the person, looking at their problems and really finding tangible solutions for them. And from that perspective, they will stay with me. Sometimes I'll move from one company to the other. They will follow me there, even though I'm not selling the same thing. So I think it's about that deeper connection and deeper relationships. And yeah.
That's interesting. So you've always been in the business field then, even since, leaving university?
Yeah, well, so my first job was in a university library in HR. And yeah, so I was, those days we used to call it personnel. and I was and they actually offered for me to go and do a master's in public administration. And I looked at the environment and we used to go to these academic board meetings, and I would see, these people with their clerks and going, oh, well, I've got a professor's degree, but actually I got it from Yale, or I got it from blah, blah, blah. And I looked at the environment and I felt, no, that's not me, and so I didn't want to stay in the academic environment. I was very, very fascinated about how businesses made profit and why others didn't. And so I kind of respectfully declined the offer for a master's in public administration. And then I came even and did a master's in business administration. I get really excited with business, and also most of my work has been with the leaders within businesses. I think it's probably because I'm very strategic in nature. So when someone tells me something, I can easily see the big picture and where we would end up if they walked in this direction, or if they wanted to change and go in this direction, that could actually lead them to what they really wanted. And so, yeah, I'm very quick in reading in between the lines and seeing the future of circumstances and saying, actually, if we're looking at your 5-year strategy, this could be the good direction if you're looking to exit within 5 years, for instance, as opposed to where you're currently heading, that kind of thing.
Do you think that everyone felt that they was able to see that sort of, that path, that knowing, but now maybe you look back and you think, actually, I was tapping into something else there, I just didn't realize?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we look at the senses, my knowing has always been the strongest. If anything, I have, because of the Akashic Records work, then one of the ways I was trained was always look at fine-tuning my senses, because it depends on who is in front of you. But for instance, when I started accessing my records, the download of information was my main channel. So knowing has always been the easiest way for me. I can really, look at a situation and know, yeah. So do I think other people are always able to see? It depends on them, and it depends on, I guess, how they are wired. But I always feel that I think my consciousness is merged into the universal consciousness in a way that I don't question the information I receive, because it feels like the truth, if you see what I mean. People agree as well. So it's like, for instance, there's this guy that I was mentoring recently, because I do executive coaching as well. And he's a lawyer who has transitioned into a different role, and it feels like he's gone into an environment where he's like a catalyst, and he was going on about his frustration around everything. And then I listened to him for almost an hour, and I said, well, if I said, maybe you are the catalyst for changing this organization, would you agree? And then he sat there almost shocked, and then goes, I think that is it, And so then from there, we're able to have conversations that allowed him to ease himself into the scenario and find solutions that would make it easier for him to effect some of those changes, and also get people to support him. So
I think there's a lot of people within the business field that have that intuitiveness and have never questioned it, don't even think, wouldn't want to talk about it, know that they've got it though, they've got something, and they don't understand. It's like an extra game plan. It's some game they've got, and but that's what they're actually doing. They were always born intuitive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just say, actually, I see it with Gary Vaynerchuk. when he's doing the speeches, I'm like,
Yeah.
that dude is channeling something. Now I know a lot of people
Yeah.
may not like his flavor, but I think he's authentic at least. You know what I mean? And what he has to say is interesting.
We all channel. I think we all do. Some more than others, maybe. A bit like how some animals are more spirited than others. But yeah, we all channel.
Yeah. So your website is.
So I have two websites. So we have the merrisconsult.com, and that talks about both the business growth and personal growth work. But it's more, I guess, it's more targeted at the person who approached me from the business angle. And then I have the maggiesarfo.com/personal growth, where I go deeper into the Akashic Records work.
When did you sort of start getting into the personal growth? I mean, not so much the spiritual side, but the personal growth. When did that go from, you offering your services to others? When did you realize that you could be doing that?
Oh, so I'll say as soon as I started. So what happened was when I started my business, because my most immediate role that I transitioned from was consulting with business leaders, especially in tech and B2B services who were going to market in US, Canada, whatever. I said I would just work with them. I will advise them on business growth and go-to-market strategies. But as soon as I started, I realized that they wanted me to be something else for them. So if my business is 6 years this year, then I would say, within a few months of starting, I transitioned into calling it business and personal growth, because that's what the clients wanted me to do. They wanted me to start doing like executive coaching and personal growth coaching for them. And so then, because I had the Akashic Records work bubbling in the background, then I thought I will then add the element of purpose and peak performance in the conversations. So it was immediate, and it was driven by the clients in terms of what, sometimes they see you as something else. Like you say, you're offering them something and they go, oh, but you could do this for me, wouldn't you? And then you go, okay, maybe I will. And so a lot of that happens.
So this is your full-time sort of work right now, doing the consultations and doing the self-employment side of stuff that you're doing as well. This is all based around London and the greater London area, probably. Or is it, and I'm guessing with the readings, which you haven't got into, but that's obviously worldwide, right?
Yeah. My business went to market globally. I had no doubt that I was growing a global business from the start. And so when I transitioned, I hired a coach in the US, and I wanted to go to market digitally. And so I started doing things like blogging and vlogging. And incidentally, most of my clients, both on the business and personal growth, came from outside the UK initially. The UK started growing, I'll say 3 years ago, although I guess I get more income from the UK now. But I had people from Canada, like I joined an organization called the Sales Enablement Society, and they wanted to interview me on their podcast. And from there, I got business from there. My personal growth clients, majority of the Akashic Records people, they came from Australia, and then US and Canada, and then Europe, Egypt. 3 years ago, I had lots of clients from Egypt because a lawyer from the UK went and sold me there. So my business is global in nature, and I'm located in the city in London.
When did your journey then into you looking into sort of spirituality or looking into something as alternative as Akashic readings, coming from the business world, fit in then? What was the start of that journey?
So my personal growth journey, like my self journey, I would say it started at least 10 years before I transitioned. Like being someone who was in the sales world, like salespeople are really into personal development and kind of creating the results I wanted. And I was kind of competitive in that space, I guess, as well. So the likes of Wayne Dyer, they are they were my Bible, like Deepak Chopra, so those two, for instance, were resources that I used to access all the time. And then when I was setting up the business, I guess a year before, not a full year, maybe 9 months. So in 2016, around June 2016, was when my full awakening started happening. I had transitioned from a corporate role into another role, and I always knew that I was going to set up my own business. It's just that at some point you don't want to, because you look at the material stuff in terms of mortgage and how much I was earning and whether I was able to do this,
Sure.
transition into self-employment and look after
It's hard,
myself
yeah,
and other
absolutely.
people. Yeah, so I was just putting it off, and I think it got to a point where I think I was pushed out, basically. So when I transitioned from my last corporate role, I contracted myself almost full time to another small organization. And then that challenged me to the core. And I was like, this is not possible. And also for me, most of the tools and how I approached my work, which always gave me the results, was no longer happening. And I was using the same tools. If anything, I was doing even more, but I wasn't getting the results. So, it felt like I was being conspired against somehow. And so in the end, I got pushed out. I left with a month's salary, and that was it, really. And but around that time, before I got out of it completely, was also when I had kind of had the experience of the Akashic Records be ringing in my ears after one morning when I was waking up. And so I was employed when I was exploring the Akashic Records in detail. And because I approached the Akashic Records when I became aware of it from the perspective of I could use it to resolve a whole lot of personal stuff for myself. And at that time, I had come across something like ancestral clearing and things like that. So that's what I thought I was going to use the Akashic Records for myself, for my family. But then when I opened my records and received information, a lot of the information also clearly stated that the Akashic Records was part of the roadmap for the business that I was about to set up. And that freaked me out. And so I kind of resisted that element. And then at the end of that year, the 2016, was when I saw another guy being interviewed on YouTube. I mentioned his name is Ernesto Ortiz. And I remember seeing him and going, that's the guy. And I hadn't met him before. So I approached him and I said, would you do a reading or a consultation for me? And this was close to Christmas 2016. And so early 2017, he did an Akashic Records consultation for me. And when I was asking, so you approach it with questions. And he also said that the corporate work was part of my Akashic Records work. And so because of that, I was like, well, maybe I can't resist it anymore. And so that's when I went ahead to get certified as an Akashic Records Consultant and then started the journey. So when I came back, in April 2017, the business then became a business and personal growth consulting firm. So that's how it worked.
Thank you for sharing that. Right. And because I've seen some of your, just browsed a few interviews that you've done, a number of podcasts. You're on a number of podcasts, on different platforms, and just a few on YouTube. And you don't push the whole Akashic readings or this side of your work unless it's, unless you're asked about it, in a sense. What has the response been from former colleagues and people within the business world that know that you do this type of work right now?
It has been phenomenal. There are so many people that I thought they wouldn't kind of think that way, who have actually had Akashic Records consultations. For instance, my Women Execs and Entrepreneurs Network in the city, the majority of them have had Akashic Records consultations. And then more in my corporate work, how I approach it is, so I always say I meet people at their point of need, right? So I'm having a conversation, and normally they're speaking to me because they need me to do something. But then I normally would say, and I have a holistic element to my business. And normally most of them will say, yeah, what is that? And then I start to explain what the Akashic records are. And I have both a scientific as well as a kind of a spiritual explanation to the Akashic records, which makes it easier for most people who are more logically minded. So I use the quantum science field way of explaining the Akashic records. But most of the time, a lot of the conversation will then stay on the Akashic records work. It's not necessarily to say that they then dump everything and then we work with the Akashic records, but more often than not, sometimes if we're doing like an 8 to 10 session program, by the time we get to session 4, they might say, oh, that thing you were talking about with regards to purpose, maybe on our next session we should look at that. And that surprises me every single time. But yeah, so we do that. And then there are those that I wouldn't bring it in at all if it hasn't come up. For instance, if they start talking about yoga and stuff like that, I know they are on an awakening journey. But I feel it's always about meeting everyone at their point of need.
Of course it is, absolutely. And so I think it was about 2017 when you started your Akashic readings, and they were the only type of readings that you do. You don't do any other type of readings, do you?
No, I do. Yes, so I do the Akashic consultations. Yes, the readings, and then I do remote healing. So sometimes based on the information they receive from the Akashic records, I realize that some people need a bit more hand holding in terms of translating that into their day-to-day life. And so because of that, I was led to develop the remote healing program, which is a combination of mentoring and remote healing. And part of that could be kind of a 12 chakra healing for them as well, or a healing that allows them to balance emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually. So the 4 aspects.
Right, because this all falls within getting even a business reading as well, because you've done over 250 business Akashic readings. How does the actual reading work in a sense, even for a business? I mean, is a business different to a personal reading, or they sort of, is it the same principles in a sense?
Pretty much the same. So I'll give you some examples. So there are some people who come to the session and they would have, especially if they're entrepreneurial in nature, then they will have questions about themselves, maybe themselves in relation to certain things in their life, and also some questions about their business. And then there are a few who would say, after their main session, they will say, can I come back and have a business reading? And that with that one, they will come with specific questions just about the business. So for instance, I did a reading for a couple of ladies in Oklahoma earlier this year. They spoke to me. Well, they each did their personal ones in November and December last year. And then in January, they came to me and did another one because they are on a mission together. And they are in the process of moving from one premises to the other. And they wanted to kind of ask some questions around that. And so that session was purely about the business, purely about the mission, the business, how they were going to take it to the next level, all of those things. Are they different? They are not that different. I guess within a business context, if we look at the Akashic Records, if we look at the Universal Akashic Records and the personal Akashic Records, then a business reading will fall into the Universal, because then the guides that show up to support that is from the Universal Consciousness. Just like someone who wants to create a cream would come and they need information about how to really make this cream serve humanity the way. And so that information is stored within the Universal Consciousness. Whereas if they were asking a personal question about their own evolution, then that information is within their own personal Akashic Records. So, yeah.
How would you summarize what an Akashic record is then, or what the Akashic records are?
So the Akashic Records are information about the universe, from the time it came into being until the time we no longer will be. And we have the Universal Records, which is information about anything and everything, a bit like Google. So when you go into Google, you type in information about a cup of tea and you get information about a cup of tea. And then the individual Akashic Records are information about us, the highest level of information about us. Some people will say soul level information from the time we come into being until the time we will no longer be. And so for some people, depending on how they're culturally wired, coming into the Akashic Records is a deep level conversation with their higher self, and with other divine beings that they're connected with. Whereas those who are not wired that way, they come into the Akashic Records, and again, it's a conversation with them within the quantum universal consciousness. But in all the scenarios, it's a conversation with their higher self, the intangible aspect of them that they don't see. But then there's wider information in terms of, depending on what they're looking for within those questioning. And it all depends on the questioning as well. And it's about being able to resolve certain things and moving forward in confidence.
So we've got Akashic reading sort of for the business, we've got it for healing, we've got it on a personal level. And some of the blockages in businesses are due to personal issues, aren't they? Most times.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And again, so for instance, with the business readings, then so some people will tell you that within the Akashic Records, we have specific higher beings, like specific ascended masters who guide the Akashic Records. So for instance, if someone is asking a scientific question or a question about business or profitability or whatever, then the type of being that comes in to share the information, if you will, would be a specialist in that space. That makes sense. So there's specialist information stored within the quantum.
And again, because you've sort of been in the field, it allows that energy to match with yours so much easier without there being much resistance, and it just flows more through you. Had you not had that background, you wouldn't be doing this.
No, because I wouldn't use the same language that others would understand. And I think that is one of the reasons why I was given this hat to wear rather than them going to a normal psychic, I guess.
Yeah. So wow. Now you say, obviously, you're on the channeling docuseries. When you've looked into channeling, it's something that you've realized that you're doing in a sense. What is channeling to you?
I think channeling is a process where, as I explained to you before, for me, channeling is a process where my consciousness merges with a higher level of consciousness for information to come through for the highest good of myself and other people involved. For me, when I'm channeling, from an Akashic Records Consultant perspective, it's about the person in front of me, unless this is my own kind of session. But if it's for someone, then I am only acting as a conscious channel. And so what happens is most of the information that comes through, I wouldn't necessarily remember. Sometimes I also opt not to remember because it's information for other people. And from that perspective, then I'm always an empty channel to be able to serve other people as well. And I record all my sessions for them. So I record the session and then I give it to them, and they can, so when they come back to me for integration session and they're saying, oh, you said blah, 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 I'm like, did I? And then I will say, can you give me the context? And they'll give, because they have the recording, they'll give me the context, and then we can kind of have a practical human day-to-day conversation about it.
How big a part does let's just move away from the businesses for a moment. I mean, it's so important because it's like one of the big ones that you do, but just even personal issues, personal readings, is relationships that one of the big ones that come to you a lot of the time as well?
It is, yeah, relationships, and this could be a combination of romantic relationships as well as just other relationships, like sometimes family relationship, sometimes relationship between them and their boss, whether they've had some kind of soul contract in the past, they're living some kind of journey together, all of these things, they come through because it's a very important aspect of our life anyway. So yeah, relationships do come through quite a lot.
And you've probably brought through so much different types of answers back from various different, a lot of different questions that's been thrown to you, and so these are done in person. You're a conscious channel, because some channelers that do this type of work, they'll need a picture, or they'll only work through creative writing, and it'll just come through the higher self, and then they'll write out the whole read. It's all very different. Do you think you've done this before? Have you worked with this energy before? Do you think, if there was,
without a doubt, lives? Yeah. So I think if I look back, I definitely have no doubt that I've done this before. In terms of having some kind of oracular kind of community hat on, where I used to read the records for communities, because of the feedback that I get from people. And again, when I went for my certification program, I had already been accessing my records. But what was also obvious, through the training, was how quickly I was able to access my records, or the records of other people, compared to perhaps some of those people that we were on the same program together. And I think it's because at that time, I just then merged into an aspect of me that carried that experience already within my DNA. And yeah, so it just decided to come when it was time for it to come and serve myself and other people.
Yeah, this is so fascinating because, I've met various different people on this journey from all walks of life, different religions that have come into this, and different ethnicities as well. And it's always great to have someone from a different culture to come on, because you are a beacon of light for others within your culture to come forward and step into their power as well. They have the same gifts that they just, for some cultural reason, haven't. I don't know. It's religious, I think, more. Do you know what I mean? It's a religious issue more that blocks people from coming into this. Have you noticed that at all?
Yeah. Oh yeah. For me, for instance, one thing. And the Akashic Records is actually mentioned in almost every religious scripture, and also in every spiritual esoteric practice. I think, so for instance, you will see that we call the Akashic Records the Book of Life, say, in the Christianity world. However, there could be connotations around it. And so, for instance, some people have described the Book of Life being a record of your bad deeds that you're going to be judged on some other day, which is not what the Akashic Records are, which is not what the Book of Life is information about anything and everything about a soul, for instance. So I feel that as I was growing up, one thing that was really clear to me was the fact that every practice, every spiritual practice, every religion has the element of fundamental truth in it, because as humans, I think we all hold the truth within us, within our DNA. And then it gets corrupted along the way, and people choose to stick to the truth or not. But I think it's the element of doctrine that, especially in times of religion, kind of deflects us from our truth. And I can understand why they have been important, because, I think as humans, we, especially when it comes to leading people, at some point our ego and the self comes in, and we want to find ways of controlling others or getting others to behave in a way so that things will be in order as we would like it to be. And so I think is the doctrines and the indoctrinations that stands in the way of each of us connecting to our truth. And I think that is why in some instances, and you get people kind of really going against their religion because they feel that they were done by in one way or the other. But yeah, that's my take on it.
No, I mean, to me, you just radiate, well, I want to use the word power, but it's not a misuse of power. It's power of, standing in your truth and being so confident in what you're doing. And do you know what it is? I think it's living your purpose. I think that's what you radiate, to be honest.
Thank you.
And that's that probably centers you a lot. And I know that's a big part of your work as well, is getting people to live in their purpose. How many people is that an issue for, do you think? Well, on top of that, how do you get people to get into their purpose?
Yeah, so I do talk a lot about purpose. I think, and for me, when I started talking about purpose, it wasn't too much of as the identification of the purpose as it is with the development of the purpose, because that was what was standing out to me as the biggest thing that a lot of the people that I was coming across were facing. So how or what does this look like? So I feel that purpose is within us. I don't think we will ever be so completely lost from who we are and what we signed up to do. I think, and when we are off, we know, there is a lot of knocking on our hearts and we are not happy, and we know. And so I think purpose is always within us. For instance, if I trade, and sometimes we look at purpose, and some people only look at purpose being kind of the job that we do or something like that, but it's not. It's just us being. And so a mother is really on purpose looking after their children really well. Being a good lover is you being on purpose, all of that. So purpose is who we are. And when we are deviating from it, we know. And then I think at different times, we get nudged to follow our purpose in a direction that I sometimes describe as the development of that purpose. The reason how I've come to this conclusion is that I have come across so many successful people, at least they take the boxes of success in so many other people's book, and everyone is saying, oh, but you're doing so well, and you've got this big business, or you're doing really well in your career, and you've got a beautiful family, and you've got friends, and you've got everything else. And so you must be happy. You must really be happy. And I come across so many people in situations like that who they were happy at one point, but they get to a point where they are not anymore. And they can't put a finger on it, but they know that there is something about to come, which is bigger, and they don't know what it is. And I feel that with those people, it's about the development of the purpose, and sometimes they need someone like me to help open the door. And what the Akashic Records does in those scenarios is kind of provide the key to open their door to go and look into the next phase of the development of the purpose. It then opens them out to what is the core, right? So, for instance, I talked about me thinking advice is a key aspect of me, and I think it's part of my purpose. Right from childhood, I used to gather people like children, like even if I was at church, I'll say to the kids, let's go and do our own thing. And then I'll just go and I was really fascinating about how kids think, and how they reason about certain things in their life and all of that, and how I could support them, kind of giving them some advice and things like that. I even took a role as a kids teacher as a vacation, and I wasn't that old. I was probably around 14, maybe less than that, and I was teaching kind of kindergarten students, pupils, but I feel that element of being able to speak to people, getting to understand their minds, and being able to advise in a way, even though I didn't call it advice at that time, has always been part of my purpose. And if I track my career, for instance, then everything I have done all the way up until now is all related to that idea of I am someone who kind of sits as an oracle and listen to people and see how I can contribute through ideas. And I guess part of it is through channeling as well. So I think going into Akashic Records, or being able to understand what the core purpose or the core mission of our soul is, enables us to piece the pieces together, and also enables us to look at the development of that purpose. And we ask questions about what else makes me really excited now, and sometimes it could be different from what we used to do, but it's another angle of the same purpose that's about to develop. So we are never really so far away from our purpose. Yeah.
And I guess there's soul lessons involved in, that person's life as well, which is all in the mix. And I suppose that comes through a lot of times. Yeah.
And so when the soul lessons are learned, then that's when they come to the end of that particular cycle. Sometimes a cycle with certain people, sometimes a cycle with something that they used to do, or a way of being, and then there's another stage. And then for a lot of people now, because the earth is awakening so rapidly, then the awakening journey is stepping in as well. And so then sometimes it's very, very different from what they think they are meant to be doing, because it's a higher level of their purpose evolution.
Gosh, yeah. I mean, that's probably what's putting some people off as well, is that, what they really are supposed to be doing and what they know as well. You're only telling them what they know deep down, right? Or reminding them. It's so different to what they're doing now. And that can be can be a big shock. And
and majority of people don't also even believe it when you say to them that you are this big soul, and in the past this is what you have done, and you are about to get into this stage of your life where you will start to impact people in this way. And a lot of people find it difficult to understand, and part of that is conditioning in terms of what we have been led to believe that we are.
Of course, yes. The little me, that's right. And when it comes to just protecting yourself and discernment, is that something that plays much into what you do? I mean, that's a sort of conversation I've had with a few people.
So discernment, I always say to, like, the email information that I send to people when they book a session, is to say to them, remember that no matter what I say, you have to pass it through your own discernment and make sure that it's true for you. From that perspective, then when we go into the Akashic Records, it's a higher vibrational place, it's the highest. So if we're looking at the various spiritual realms, we look at the Akashic Records as the penthouse. So it's very, very high vibration. However, it's still important that you are able to deflect any interferences. It could be coming from the person you doing a consultation for, it could be from yourself. And so normally I would put kind of a pearlescent bubble of protection around us before we go into the meditation, before we open. I haven't had any instances of interference, but how I was trained is that if something like that happened, you could always stop, close the records, maybe center yourself, bring yourself into a higher vibrational state before you open the records again.
I would say the interference would come from the person, and not intentionally. Maybe there's something else that's working with them that they've attracted, right? And or
without knowing,
or it's followed them into this cycle of life. And they've got to choose whether to say goodbye to it, and that may not be a conscious negative energy. It may be something they're doing in their life as well. What if they've got addiction issues?
And even something like fear, right? So sometimes, and some of their work actually goes even back into when someone was being conceived, and whether so sometimes someone would be going through life with a deep sense of fear, although they can't explain where that fear is coming from. And sometimes it's the entity of fear was attached to them at the point of conception. If shamans, and shamans do this work where they don't just do the inner child healing, but they go back into when they were being conceived, all the way through the pregnancy until they were born, and even go further back into whether this fear is actually from a past life rather than from this present life, to be able to detach themselves from it, or detach the person from it, because sometimes it's a foreign entity that has attached itself to them, but somehow, because their energy allows it, then they stay, and at some point they realize that they have to do something about it. And so then these could be some of the questions that they bring into the Akashic Records. We look into the information to discover what it is, and then the integration work is about then removing this so that we can rewrite the future. So,
fascinating. God, that's all these are sort of subjects on their own, right? Do you know what I mean? With the amount of readings that you've done, I'm sure you've come across all sorts of just experiences that you've learned from, and that you could share. With karma, then, does that play anything in the work that you do? Do you think?
A huge part, and sometimes I talk about the notion of karmic absolution. So karma gets a bad rap. And so sometimes we look at karma and we're like, it means you do something bad and bad comes to you as a result. Karma as a word is a neutral word, is the world's or the universe's way of balancing itself. And so how karma plays within my work could be a scenario where someone has always been kind of born a king, or born with a silver spoon in their mouth, and at some point they choose to come and live or experience what it's like to be poor, and in doing that they gain because the Akashic Records work also helps us understand the evolution of the soul. And so you hear people talk about is the evolution of the soul within the quantum fabric of the universal consciousness. And so we learn, and that is why we have people who are old souls, and then we have people who are not so matured as souls. And so karma plays a part where someone chooses to come in and experience a certain thing, to add to their soul's experience, but also to experience what it's like to be in those kind of shoes. And so then they are able to be who they want to be and serve others as part of their soul's evolution and their soul's journey. And And then other times you will also see karma playing up in the form of relationships between two people where they have had instances in the past where they've had maybe disagreements, and they have decided to come in and work it out so that they can heal any, I guess, bad feelings or emotions between the relationship that they have, so that they balance the karma in a way. So those kind of things happen. So that will then show up in the soul contract. And normally when something like that comes up, then we need to check whether the learnings have been learned for both parties, or at least for the person who is currently accessing the Akashic records. And if the learnings are complete, then we deem it as being complete within, or if it's not complete, we can still ask for it to be resolved within karmic absolution, which is whatever they are granted to resolve at this point in order to live their life in a happier state that they can. So then we look at things like rewriting some of these contracts in a way that serves them in the now. So karma plays different roles. I have seen instances where you have a household animal. So I said before that some animals are more spirited than others, right? So for instance, a cat who has been a cat, within a household, for instance, was very, very much at a soul level intertwined with the family. And this cat had gone through, their soul cycle in such a way that it wasn't going to come back into existence, at least our physical plane existence. But when it went, the owner was having so many issues with having a child in such a way that the soul decided to come back and be born again into human, right? So this is, so a lot of these things happen, but they are all parts of relationships, karmic relationships, soul contracts, and other forms of, the soul's journey within the universal consciousness.
Yeah, I'm trying not to interrupt you there, but you mentioned the pets there. Let's just ask. I mean, do you do pet readings at all? Do people ask for the?
I do.
Pets?
So I normally say I do the business and the human Akashic records, but I can read humans. I can read for animals. I can read for buildings. I can read for the universal consciousness of groups of people if they agree for their records to be opened. So for instance, when I was in Taj Mahal, I opened the records for Taj Mahal as a building. And then when you open, those kinds of records, you see information about, the entity or the building or whatever it is. So yeah.
That's so fascinating, especially with the times that we're living in right now, with where we're going as well. I just want to touch on a few things before we move forward. Let's just go back to your website as well. So just remind us again, what are some of the services that are on that website for those that listen just to this on audio as a podcast as well?
So depending on what you're looking for, my website gives you information about business growth services, as well as personal growth services. And then within the personal growth services, you have access to things like Akashic Records readings and consultations, purpose development consultations, as well as the CreateBalance Healing and Mentoring Program, which is a program that allows you to connect with your core self and then get balanced in terms of emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual. As part of that, we do 12 chakra alignment healing as well to connect you with who you are at the core, so you can move forward in confidence.
Yeah, this is so varied. Your work is kind of like there's so many things you touch upon, and there's so many sort of different like hats you wear, but they all sort of connect back really to I guess we are the creator of our reality. And no matter where we are in our life, it's up for us. We created ourselves into this situation, and we can create ourselves out as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I'm always about connecting people to their core blueprint, devoid of all the conditioning. And when you are in your core blueprint, you make decisions in a very different way.
Do you find that maybe some people coming from the business side, I'm not saying this is, but just out of curiosity, that they come with a
Hmm.
bit of an ego sometimes, which is fine. We've all got one, right? Even though they want that they're coming to you for this particular type of work,
Hmm.
but that not the ego stripped away after they've had a session with you, but
Hmm.
it definitely sometimes the ego does need a check in. There is a path for the
It
ego,
does.
isn't there? Yeah.
Yeah, it could play. It could play in the conversation. So here is the thing with the Akashic records. Your ability to allow the information to come in. Because mind you, I am the empty channel. It just being there for you to have a conversation with your higher self and your the other aspects of yourself. And so when you ask a question which is vague, you are likely to receive a vague answer. When you ask a question which is open and allowing, you would be amazed in terms of the information that keeps coming to assist you to live your life in your highest potential. So that plays up all the time. And yeah, so the more we allow ourselves to be aligned, and the more we come, with ourselves, devoid of everything else around us, the more we are able to make the most of the session.
Obviously, with the times that we live in now, we've just come out of a pandemic for those listening to this in the future,
Yes.
and we've just gone
Yes.
into a European war, which is a tragedy on
Oh
so
my God.
many
Yes.
levels. So many people
Mm,
are suffering right now, and
mm,
it is a tragedy, like I say, and it needs to
mm,
stop. And there's a lot of suffering, and there's ramifications of what's going on right now in the business world, of course. So
mm.
not regardless of what's what's with the pandemic, but obviously that's had a big knock-on effect as well. What has been do people come to you in a sort of heightened state of fear sometimes? Are they worried? Are they they're concerned about where they're going to be going with their business, with everything going on? And
Hmm.
how do they leave a session like yours then, coming from one space and going to another?
Yeah, so to answer your first part, yes. So since the pandemic, more and more people have had the chance to go deeper inside themselves, to ask some of those questions that they perhaps were pushing aside. And also people who are going through what is going on are coming through to ask questions, in order to find directions to live their lives and also to lead their businesses in a way that serves them and others, to the extent that I've had people coming in to even talk about whether they need to be taking vaccines and all of that as well. Um, but yeah, so, and everyone is different, and we open the Akashic records, and the information that comes through is what they receive. How do they leave? When they are in the energy of the Akashic records, I would say majority of the time, people get called into the Akashic records for deep healing. Um, and almost everyone, without exception, say when their records are open, they experience this beautiful energy of ultimate love and non-judgment. And so for most people, there is a lot of healing that happens in the process of the Akashic records being read that they don't know, and I don't take credit for it, but it feels like people are drawn to the Akashic records when is the next answer for them to move forward in
Yeah, that
confidence.
purpose, that next calling of
Yeah,
purpose, isn't it? And don't you feel
yes,
that the amount with all these things that are going on right now, it's for some people, it's shifting them into a new purpose.
absolutely, absolutely. So that happens, but in terms of how they leave, the majority of people always say they leave with a better sense of where they are and any decisions. And sometimes they don't need to take any decisions. They realize at the end of the conversation. But what happens even more strikingly is how, like 2 months later, 3 months later, sometimes a year, sometimes 3 years later, they come back and they go, wow, since my session, this happened and that happened, and I cannot thank you enough. They're thanking me, but again, they should thank their higher beings and their masters. But yeah, so I feel that people get drawn into their records, and there is the story that happens almost for most people as well. So, and it's a case of, sometimes someone mentions the Akashic records to them, and then a few months later or a year later, they clearly see the Akashic records somewhere else, or someone else mentions it to them. And so by the time people come to me to say, I want an Akashic records consultation, it feels like they are being called. There have been some signs to call them into their records, and is one of the reasons why I never deny anyone an opportunity to enter their records, because I hear that some people say to people, I cannot access your records for you. But I feel that, at least for me, everyone who comes into their records, I feel that they are being guided into their records for a reason. And for some people, it's just a healing, that they need to be in a very high vibrational state for that healing to be done at all levels.
Absolutely. And I think the word surrender as well is probably one that they learn,
Yes.
in that process. Yeah, that's an important one. So coming to you, basically, it's sort of a way to master their life, or where they're at right now, to master that bit or the next step, and to sort of raise the vibration a bit, so that they're, whatever they're living in that's causing them some disease or some issue, then at least then maybe they can feel a bit relieved from that.
Yes.
We're not saying it's the solution for everything, but it's a way forward to just raise your vibration, which I think sometimes we can't do by ourselves.
No. And I would say the Mayan prayer that I use, it carries with itself the highest frequency vibrational level as well, which really does help. And so it's for instance, in terms of how people access the records, you will find that some people could just meditate, and if their vibration is high enough, they get into their records. Some people actually get given a key to be able to access their records by higher beings that they connected with. And then, some people will use a combination of a meditation, visualization, and a prayer to get into the records. But I would say that before the prayer that I currently use, I bought a book online with another prayer in it, which I used to access my records. But I wasn't able to get the amount of information and insight that I knew that I could access until I came across this Mayan one as well. So I think there is that as well, but ultimately it's about the person and the vibrational frequency of the person. But sometimes some of the prayers do help.
and look, from what I understand, past life, future lives, the now, it's all happening now. It's
oh yeah.
It's not really understandable as we can understand it, right? And
well,
really,
there is the parallel as well, isn't there?
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, really, all that matters. Well, that's true. Yeah. Really, all that matters is now. Yeah. And that's what your work does. I think it takes people right smack bang back into the now, because I guess, some past lives will come up sometimes that may be influencing this one, but not all you're only going to hear what you need to hear. You're not going to be overwhelmed.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I don't encourage people to come into a session wanting to know this and this and this about their past life, because I don't think it's necessary. Your past life information comes in when you're asking a question about your now. If it's relevant from a past life perspective, then it gets shown so that you can take, and for a lot of people, especially with the awakening as well, it's a case of some of their gifts coming back to them, just like me saying to you that I feel that with the Akashic records, I have definitely done it in the past. And so it's an opportunity for you to tap into your previous gifts, because it's being held in your DNA anyway. And so a session activates it for you, or being told or being shown what you used to do allows you to then embody that and then move it forward with it as well.
Yeah, and it really does come down to, I mean, I hate this, not hate the word, but it's true. It's all about healing, isn't it? That's in some ways something's going to be healed somewhere, and yeah, and like we've probably said in this interview, you're drawn to someone like yourself. Do you know what I mean? And sometimes you don't even know why. How did I end up here? But but what comes out of it is pretty amazing, actually. And I don't want to forget your business work as well, because there'll be people watching this who are out there in the business world, maybe in the business world, in the spiritual field. And that's another thing you can do as well, is you've been doing business for so long, you can help from target audience. I mentioned this off air probably, but you do stuff like target audiences, branding, ways to move your business forward and to accomplish the things you want. There's so much practical stuff here as well.
It is, yeah. So some people call me, or they call my business a conscious business. And so for the business work that I do, it's about really looking at where you are at this level and where you need to get to from a growth perspective. And the work is a combination of practical business growth, go-to-market strategies, really understanding who you're serving, how you message them, how you move from one level of growth to the other. But as part of that, I do a lot of executive coaching and mentoring as well. So enabling you to connect with your true self as the true leader, and then looking at how this aligns back into your teams. And increasingly what we're seeing is values alignment. And so you as a leader within your business, what are your values and how are you able to communicate this value and the vision to the other members of the team, so you are all on the same ship, which I call the mothership, so you can move in the right direction. But again, we have a lot of conscious businesses coming to the fore, right? Because that's what we need. When I spoke to you before, Kevin, I said to you that I call myself a blueprinter, and I feel that the big work I do in the business world is the fact that we do have some systems that are obsolete within our institutions, and that is what I bring. So I have a very natural way of looking at what is and saying, actually, we don't need to necessarily go from A, B, C to D before we go to E. But I could always show you a way of doing this in a way that still gives us the results that we want and much more.
Yeah, this is what makes you unique. I'm telling you, it's. I don't come across many people with the business side and the personal. It's very, very cool what you're doing. And no, you're right. There are so many more businesses now that are trying to be ethical, as you say, more conscious. It's changing times. Had you had done this sometime, even a decade ago, as you are now, would people have been so ready for it? I don't know. It just feels that we live in different times.
It does, and I have seen a shift personally in my business, in the business growth work post-pandemic, I will say. So, for instance, prior to the pandemic, I was having conversation. Well, when I set up my business, I came up with a methodology called human-centered selling. And it was about connecting people more deeply and really serving them in such a way that they stay for much longer with you, and your portfolio size in terms of the amount of money they're spending with you actually goes higher and higher. Those were the conversations I used to have. However, after COVID happened, I have been given opportunities to work with even more businesses. And for instance, I'll give you an example. I was called in to go and deliver a workshop or kind of a weekend retreat, in a way, like a leadership program for the board of a bank, like a normal UK bank. And, 4 years ago, I would never have thought that this was possible, right? And they gave me the license. They said, we don't care how you're going to do it. It's about how in a way, the pandemic allowed us to go deeper. And so we really started looking at the mental and emotional aspects of ourselves. I write about kind of emotional intelligence. That's what I choose to call it because it makes sense to the business world. But in most of these talks and in most of these conversations and workshops, all I'm doing is enabling people to open the channel between making a decision which factors both the heart intelligence and the mind intelligence. And this, for me personally, wasn't possible 4 years ago, but now is a conversation that I can easily have, and people really want me to come and do it. So things are shifting, definitely.
I told you this when I first spoke to you, because you contacted us and we sort of, we eventually got in contact because I've just been busy, you've just been busy, and well, actually, I'm terrible to get hold of right now, to be honest with you, right? But I said to you, I don't know what it is. I just feel that pull from America for you. I don't, and I still, even in this conversation, well, I've not been thinking about it, but I just feel it now. Because I was going to ask you to sort of, cap this off, where do you see yourself going? But I don't want to influence it too much by saying that, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I feel I'm always this sort of person that says, wherever I feel like home, I wouldn't mind living there. And I've always wanted to, every time I visit the US, I go, I could live there one day, so I am open to possibilities. I have had some conversations recently about the potential, but nothing concrete yet. But I wouldn't surprise at all to see myself in the US.
If your work ended up here, definitely. And any books on the way? Do you feel there's any books coming? Because I know you've sort of contributed to one book, which is available on your site. We'll link the book in the description below. But for your own book?
Yes. I do have 2 books coming. One is on conscious leadership. And then the other one is experiences with the Akashic Records and self-transformation.
Oh, wow. You are on the verge of launching some, well, they're going to be fantastic books. And I'll have to get you back on for that. When you do, we will get you back on. Let us know when they come out as well. And I'd love to link them in the description below. So if people watching this in the future, those links are in the description below. They've already manifested.
Thank you, Kevin.
What would be a message to leave the audience with, do you think?
My message would be that potential always manifests when you know what to do with it. And so always be in the present moment, because I find that is where we get and experience the most potential. And when we are in the present, we really create the potential, the future potential, before we step into it, before we take the action. So that's what I want to leave with you today. So take time to be with yourself, and know that potential manifests when we know what to do with it.
Well, I just want to thank you for coming on to the Channeling docuseries and for being a light to others, and the sort of braveness that you had to do to step up to that, especially from the corporate world where you come from, and all is possible. And that's an example of that. So just thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm a big fan of your work, I said before. And so I want to say thank you to your audience for having me on the show. Thank you, Kevin, for inviting me to the show. And I hope that the messages through this conversation will touch everyone at the exact point of need.